Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that a firm's internal policy allows client funds to be held in the firm's general operating account for up to 3 business days before being transferred to a segregated client account, provided the funds are clearly identified internally. This policy is justified by the firm as streamlining the reconciliation process and reducing administrative overhead. Considering the absolute priority of client asset protection under relevant financial regulations, which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to regulatory requirements and professional best practice? Option A. Immediately segregate all client funds received into a designated client bank account upon receipt. Option B. Rely on the firm's internal audit department to verify the segregation of client funds within 5 business days of their receipt. Option C. Segregate client funds only if the total amount received from a client in a single day exceeds a predefined internal monetary threshold. Option D. Hold client funds in the firm's general operating account for up to 3 business days before segregation, as per the internal policy. The correct answer is A. Immediately segregate all client funds received into a designated client bank account upon receipt. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in ensuring compliance with ACI operations certificate regulations concerning the handling of client orders, specifically regarding the segregation of client assets. The firm's internal policy, while aiming for efficiency, creates a potential conflict with regulatory requirements designed to protect client funds from firm insolvency. The core of the challenge lies in balancing operational expediency with the absolute priority of client asset protection, as mandated by regulatory frameworks. The correct approach, which involves segregating client funds in a designated client bank account immediately upon receipt, represents best professional practice because it directly adheres to the principle of client asset protection. This practice is fundamental to maintaining client trust and is a cornerstone of regulatory oversight in financial operations. By physically separating client money from the firm's own operational funds, it ensures that in the event of the firm facing financial difficulties or insolvency, these client assets are ring-fenced and not available to the firm's creditors. This aligns with the spirit and letter of regulations designed to prevent commingling and safeguard client investments. An incorrect approach that involves holding client funds in the firm's general operating account until the settlement date fails to meet regulatory requirements. This practice constitutes a commingling of client and firm assets, which is a direct violation of regulations designed to protect client money. Such commingling exposes client funds to the firm's business risks, including insolvency, and can lead to significant client losses. Ethically, it breaches the duty of care owed to clients and undermines the integrity of the financial markets. Another incorrect approach, which is to only segregate funds if the amount exceeds a certain internal threshold, is also professionally unacceptable. Regulatory requirements for asset segregation are typically absolute and do not permit arbitrary internal thresholds. This approach creates a loophole that could leave smaller client balances vulnerable, contrary to the principle of equal protection for all client assets. It demonstrates a disregard for the comprehensive nature of regulatory mandates and a failure to uphold the highest ethical standards of client care. A further incorrect approach, such as relying solely on the firm's internal audit to confirm segregation at a later date, is insufficient. While internal audits are important, they are a post hoc control. The regulatory requirement is for proactive segregation at the point of receipt. Delaying segregation or relying on a retrospective check does not provide the immediate protection mandated by law and can still result in the commingling of funds during the interim period, exposing clients to unacceptable risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of all applicable regulations, particularly those pertaining to client asset protection and segregation. Professionals must then critically assess internal policies and operational procedures against these regulatory mandates. Where a discrepancy exists, the regulatory requirement must always take precedence. This involves prioritizing client protection above operational convenience or potential cost savings. In cases of doubt or ambiguity, seeking clarification from compliance departments or legal counsel is essential. The ultimate goal is to implement procedures that demonstrably and consistently uphold regulatory obligations and ethical duties to clients. Question 2. Which approach would be most appropriate for an operations officer who has identified a significant risk of financial loss and potential regulatory noncompliance associated with a client's instruction for a complex transaction, after the compliance department has flagged it for review? Option A. Immediately escalate the matter to senior management and the compliance department for further review and a joint discussion with the client. Option B. Execute the transaction but provide the client with a heavily redacted summary of the risks. Option C. Proceed with the transaction as instructed, assuming the client is aware of and accepts the risks. Option D. Refuse the client's instruction immediately and inform them that the firm cannot facilitate such a transaction. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the transaction as instructed, assuming the client is aware of and accepts the risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit, albeit potentially ill-advised, instruction and the firm's duty of care and regulatory obligations. The firm's compliance department has identified a significant risk associated with the proposed transaction, which could expose the client to substantial financial loss and potentially violate anti-money laundering (AML) regulations. The challenge lies in balancing the client's autonomy with the firm's responsibility to act in the client's best interest and adhere to legal and ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to navigate this delicate balance without alienating the client or compromising professional integrity. The correct approach, which involves escalating the issue to senior management and the compliance department for further review and discussion with the client, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of robust risk management and client protection mandated by regulatory frameworks such as those governing financial services operations. Specifically, it upholds the firm's obligation to conduct due diligence, identify and mitigate risks, and ensure that client instructions are not executed if they contravene regulatory requirements or are demonstrably detrimental to the client's financial well-being. This approach allows for collective, informed decision that considers all angles, including legal, ethical, and client relationship aspects, before proceeding. It also ensures that the client receives comprehensive advice and understands the potential ramifications of their instructions. An incorrect approach that involves executing the transaction immediately without further internal consultation or discussion with the client would be professionally unacceptable. This would constitute a failure to adequately assess and manage risk, potentially leading to regulatory breaches, such as inadequate AML checks or a failure to act in the client's best interest. It would also demonstrate a disregard for the firm's internal control procedures and the expertise of its compliance department. Another incorrect approach, which is to refuse the client's instruction outright without a thorough internal review and a clear explanation of the reason, could damage the client relationship and potentially lead to a complaint. While the firm has a duty to protect the client, a complete refusal without due process and communication can be seen as unprofessional and may not fully explore alternative solutions or the client's underlying intentions. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the transaction while downplaying the identified risks to the client would be a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This misrepresentation of risk undermines the client's ability to make informed decisions and violates the duty of transparency and honesty. It exposes both the client and the firm to significant liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment, regulatory compliance, and client welfare. This involves a structured process of identifying potential issues, consulting relevant internal expertise, compliance, legal, communicating transparently with the client, and documenting all decisions and actions. When faced with conflicting instructions or potential risks, escalation and collaborative decision-making are crucial to ensure that actions are both legally sound and ethically responsible. Question 3. The review process indicates that a new regulatory directive concerning the handling of client transaction data is imminent. Which of the following approaches would best ensure the firm's operational readiness and compliance with this new directive? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of all affected operational processes, systems, and data flows, engaging relevant departmental stakeholders to identify specific impacts, risks, and necessary changes, and document these findings with a proposed implementation plan. Option B. Rely primarily on the legal department's summary of the new directive to inform operational adjustments, assuming existing data handling procedures are sufficient. Option C. Assume that the new directive will not significantly alter current operational workflows and proceed with business as usual while awaiting further clarification. Option D. Postpone a detailed impact assessment until the regulatory deadline is within 1 month, focusing only on the most obvious changes to client data entry. Correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of all affected operational processes, systems, and data flows, engaging relevant departmental stakeholders to identify specific impacts, risks, and necessary changes, and document these findings with a proposed implementation plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in assessing the impact of a new regulatory requirement on a firm's operational processes. The firm must not only understand the new rules, but also proactively identify how they will affect existing workflows, systems, and personnel. The difficulty lies in the potential for unforeseen consequences, the need for cross-departmental collaboration, and the risk of non-compliance if the impact is underestimated or misunderstood. Accurate impact assessment is crucial for effective implementation, resource allocation, and risk mitigation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive review of all affected operational areas. This includes identifying specific processes, systems, and data flows that will be directly or indirectly influenced by the new regulation. It requires engaging with subject matter experts from relevant departments, e.g., compliance, operations, IT, risk management, to gather detailed insights. Documenting the identified impacts, potential risks, and necessary changes, along with a proposed timeline for implementation, forms the basis of a robust impact assessment. This methodical process ensures that all facets of the business are considered, aligning with the principles of regulatory adherence and operational efficiency expected under the ACI Operations Certificate Framework. It demonstrates a proactive and diligent approach to managing regulatory change, which is a cornerstone of sound operational practice. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on the legal or compliance department's interpretation of the regulation without consulting operational teams. This fails to capture the practical implications of the changes on day-to-day activities, potentially leading to overlooked operational disruptions or inadequate system adjustments. It neglects the principle of integrated risk management, where operational and compliance risks are viewed holistically. Another incorrect approach is to assume that existing processes can absorb the new requirements without modification. This overlooks the potential for increased workload, the need for new controls, or the incompatibility of current systems with the regulatory demands. Such an assumption can lead to operational strain, errors, and ultimately, non-compliance. A third incorrect approach is to delay the impact assessment until the regulation is close to its effective date. This creates a compressed timeline, increasing the likelihood of rushed decisions, insufficient testing, and inadequate training. It also misses the opportunity to influence the implementation strategy and potentially identify more efficient ways to comply, which is a failure in proactive risk management and operational planning. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should adopt a structured, collaborative, and forward-looking approach. The decision-making process should begin with a thorough understanding of the regulatory text, followed by a detailed mapping of affected business processes. Engaging stakeholders from all relevant departments is paramount to gather diverse perspectives and ensure a comprehensive view of the impact. The assessment should quantify potential risks and benefits and outline actionable steps for mitigation and implementation. Regular reviews and updates to the assessment are necessary as implementation progresses. This systematic approach ensures that regulatory obligations are met efficiently and effectively, minimizing operational disruption and compliance risk. Question 4. The analysis reveals that a long-standing institutional client, known for its sophisticated trading strategies, has submitted an order to execute a series of large, complex derivative trades that appear to be designed to manipulate the closing price of a specific security. While the client has a history of profitable, albeit aggressive, trading, this particular instruction raises concerns about potential market abuse under the relevant regulatory framework. The firm's compliance department has flagged the order for review. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional course of action for the firm? Option A. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the precise objective and rationale behind the proposed trades, assess their potential impact on market integrity, and explain the firm's regulatory obligations regarding market abuse. Option B. Execute the trades as instructed, assuming the client's expertise and the potential for legitimate, albeit aggressive, market positioning. Option C. Seek a written confirmation from the client acknowledging the potential for market manipulation and stating they accept full responsibility for any regulatory consequences. Option D. Immediately refuse the instruction and inform the client that the firm cannot facilitate trades that may be construed as market manipulation without further discussion. The correct answer is B. Execute the trades as instructed, assuming the client's expertise and the potential for legitimate, albeit aggressive, market positioning. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit instruction and the firm's regulatory obligations. The firm must navigate the client's desire for a specific, potentially risky, investment strategy with its duty to ensure suitability and prevent market abuse. The challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the firm's fiduciary responsibilities and adherence to regulatory frameworks designed to protect both the client and market integrity. This requires a nuanced understanding of the client's true objectives, risk tolerance, and the potential implications of their requested action. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's request against regulatory requirements, particularly those concerning suitability and market abuse. This means engaging in a detailed dialogue with the client to understand the rationale behind their instruction, assessing their financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance. If the requested action appears unsuitable or potentially indicative of market abuse, the firm has a regulatory obligation to refuse the instruction and explain the reasons clearly, citing relevant regulations. This upholds the firm's duty of care, ensures compliance with regulations like those governing market conduct and client suitability, and protects the client from potentially detrimental actions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to execute the client's instruction without question, assuming the client is fully informed and acting in their own best interest. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for suitability assessments and could expose both the client and the firm to significant risk, potentially violating rules against facilitating unsuitable investments or market abuse. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately refuse the instruction without attempting to understand the client's motivations or providing a clear explanation. This could be seen as poor client service and might not adequately address potential regulatory concerns if the client's underlying intent was legitimate but poorly articulated. It also misses an opportunity to educate the client on regulatory boundaries. A third incorrect approach would be to seek a vague, generalized confirmation from the client that they understand the risks, without a specific assessment of their suitability or the potential for market abuse. This is a superficial compliance measure that does not fulfill the spirit or letter of regulatory obligations, leaving the firm vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny and the client exposed to undue risk. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, prioritizing regulatory compliance and client protection. This involves a structured process. First, understanding the client's request and its context. Second, evaluating the request against established suitability criteria and market abuse regulations. Third, communicating clearly and transparently with the client, explaining any concerns and regulatory limitations. And fourth, documenting all interactions and decisions thoroughly. If a conflict arises, the firm must err on the side of caution and regulatory adherence, even if it means refusing a client's instruction. Question 5. The audit findings indicate a recurring discrepancy in the reconciliation of trade settlement data, suggesting potential inaccuracies in the firm's record-keeping processes. The operations team is under pressure to resolve this finding promptly to avoid further scrutiny. Which of the following actions best represents a professionally sound and compliant approach to addressing this issue? Option A. Delegate the entire reconciliation process and the resolution of the discrepancies to an external vendor without establishing internal oversight or verification procedures. Option B. Classify the discrepancies as minor operational noise and close the audit finding, focusing resources on more pressing operational tasks. Option C. Manually adjust the settlement records to match the reconciled figures, assuming the reconciled figures are correct, without investigating the underlying cause of the initial discrepancy. Option D. Initiate a detailed investigation to identify the root cause of the reconciliation discrepancies and implement corrective actions to ensure accurate data capture and reporting moving forward. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed investigation to identify the root cause of the reconciliation discrepancies and implement corrective actions to ensure accurate data capture and reporting moving forward. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the operations professional to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with the fundamental regulatory obligation to maintain accurate and complete records. The audit finding highlights a potential breakdown in controls, and the decision on how to rectify it involves assessing the impact on data integrity, regulatory compliance, and the firm's internal control environment. The pressure to resolve the issue quickly without compromising regulatory standards necessitates careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to understand the root cause of the discrepancies, and then implementing a process to accurately reconstruct the missing or incorrect data. This aligns with the principles of maintaining accurate and complete records as mandated by regulatory frameworks. Specifically, it upholds the requirement for firms to have robust systems and controls in place to ensure the integrity of their data. Reconstructing the data, even if it requires effort, demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and a proactive approach to rectifying control weaknesses. This approach prioritizes data accuracy and regulatory adherence over simply closing the audit finding with minimal effort. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting to manually adjust the system without a clear understanding of the underlying cause of the discrepancies. This could lead to further data corruption, mask systemic issues, and violate regulations requiring accurate record keeping. It fails to address the root cause and may create a false sense of resolution. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the audit finding as a minor operational glitch without proper investigation. This demonstrates a disregard for internal controls and regulatory oversight. It could lead to repeated issues, significant regulatory penalties, and reputational damage if the discrepancies are material. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on an external party to rectify the issue without internal oversight or verification. While external expertise can be valuable, the firm remains ultimately responsible for the accuracy and completeness of its records. Delegating without adequate oversight can lead to a lack of accountability and potential for errors to go unnoticed. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with audit findings. This framework typically involves 1. Understanding the finding. Clearly comprehend the nature and potential impact of the audit observation. 2. Root cause analysis. Investigate to identify the underlying reasons for the issue. 3. Impact assessment. Determine the materiality and regulatory implications of the finding. 4. Solution development. Propose a remediation plan that addresses the root cause and ensures future compliance. 5. Implementation and verification. Execute the plan and subsequently verify its effectiveness. 6. Documentation. Maintain thorough records of the investigation, actions taken, and verification. This systematic approach ensures that issues are resolved effectively, compliantly, and sustainably. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that operational staff are increasingly encountering client requests that, while not overtly illegal, may present potential risks related to money laundering or terrorist financing. In such a scenario, where a client requests a series of complex, high-value international transfers to jurisdictions with a known higher risk profile, and asks for advice on how to structure these to minimize administrative hurdles. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for an operations professional? Option A. Refuse to process any transfers for this client immediately due to the perceived risk, without further investigation or consultation. Option B. Directly advise the client on the most efficient ways to structure the transfers to minimize administrative hurdles, as this is a standard client service request. Option C. Conduct a thorough internal review of the client's transaction history and risk profile, and if any concerns are identified, escalate the matter to the compliance department for further investigation and potential suspicious activity reporting. Option D. Inform the client that their request is problematic and suggest they seek advice from another institution that is more accommodating to such transaction structures. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough internal review of the client's transaction history and risk profile, and if any concerns are identified, Escalate the matter to the compliance department for further investigation and potential suspicious activity reporting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between client confidentiality and the regulatory obligation to report suspicious activities. The operations professional must navigate the delicate balance of protecting client information while simultaneously upholding their duty to prevent financial crime. The challenge lies in accurately assessing whether the client's request, while seemingly innocuous, could be a precursor to illicit activity, requiring a robust understanding of anti-money laundering (AML) and counter-terrorist financing (CTF) regulations. The pressure to maintain client relationships must not override the imperative to comply with legal and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough internal review and, if necessary, escalation to the compliance department. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory requirements under frameworks such as the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, and the Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing and Transfer of Funds, Information on the Payer, Regulations 2017 MLR. These regulations mandate that financial institutions establish and maintain robust AML/CTF policies and procedures, including the reporting of suspicious transactions, STR, to the National Crime Agency, NCA. A diligent internal review ensures that the request is assessed against established risk profiles and red flags. If the review raises concerns, escalating to compliance triggers the formal STR process, fulfilling the legal obligation to report potential financial crime without tipping off the client, which is a criminal offense. This approach prioritizes regulatory compliance and the integrity of the financial system. Incorrect approach is analysis. Directly fulfilling the client's request without any internal review or consultation with compliance is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the established AML/CTF controls designed to detect and prevent financial crime. This action could be construed as facilitating money laundering or terrorist financing, leading to severe penalties for both the individual and the firm, including substantial fines and reputational damage. It also breaches the duty of care owed to the firm and the wider financial system. Refusing the client's request outright without any explanation or internal assessment is also professionally unsound. While it avoids direct complicity, it fails to follow the proper procedure for handling potentially suspicious activity. It does not allow for the necessary investigation to determine if a reportable event has occurred, potentially missing an opportunity to alert authorities to criminal activity. Furthermore, it can damage client relationships unnecessarily if the request was, in fact, legitimate. Seeking advice from the client on how to structure the transaction to avoid scrutiny is a severe breach of regulatory and ethical standards. This action directly undermines the AML/CTF framework and could be interpreted as actively assisting in the concealment of illicit funds. It is a direct contravention of the principle of no tipping off and exposes the professional and the firm to criminal liability. Professional reasoning. Professionals in operations must adopt a risk-based approach, guided by their firm's AML/CTF policies and relevant legislation. When faced with a client request that raises even a minor concern, the immediate step should be to consult internal procedures and escalate to the compliance department. This ensures that all actions are documented, assessed by trained personnel, and reported appropriately if necessary. The decision-making process should prioritize regulatory adherence, ethical conduct, and the protection of the firm and the financial system from illicit activities. Maintaining client relationships is important, but it must always be secondary to legal and ethical obligations. Question 7. During the evaluation of a new automated trade confirmation system designed to streamline post-trade processing, a junior operations manager proposes a significant reduction in manual reconciliation checks, citing potential cost savings and faster settlement times. However, the proposed changes would also eliminate a specific data validation step that is currently used to cross-reference counterparty details against an internal watch list. Which of the following actions best demonstrates a compliant and professionally sound approach to process optimization in this scenario? Option A. Proceed with the reduction in manual reconciliation checks, but instruct the compliance department to conduct a post-implementation review to identify any potential issues. Option B. Inform the junior operations manager that cost savings should not be prioritized over established control procedures, and reject the proposal outright without further investigation. Option C. Immediately implement the proposed reduction in manual reconciliation checks to achieve the anticipated cost savings and faster settlement, assuming the new system's inherent controls are sufficient. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to determine the likelihood and impact of not performing the manual reconciliation checks, and explore alternative automated validation methods that incorporate the watch list cross-reference before approving any changes. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to determine the likelihood and impact of not performing the manual reconciliation checks, and explore alternative automated validation methods that incorporate the watch list cross-reference before approving any changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the imperative to maintain robust risk management and compliance. The firm is under pressure to reduce costs, a common driver for process optimization, but any changes must not compromise the integrity of its operations or its adherence to regulatory requirements. The challenge lies in identifying optimization strategies that are both effective and compliant, avoiding shortcuts that could lead to regulatory breaches or increased operational risk. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, risk-based assessment before implementing any changes. This involves detailed analysis of current processes, identification of bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and the development of solutions that are tested and validated. Crucially, it ensures that all proposed changes are reviewed against relevant regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial operations and data handling, to confirm compliance. This systematic and compliant approach minimizes the risk of unintended consequences, such as increased error rates, data breaches, or non-compliance with reporting obligations, thereby safeguarding the firm's reputation and regulatory standing. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering operational impact or regulatory adherence would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to the implementation of poorly designed automated systems that fail to capture necessary audit trails, or the reduction of human oversight in critical control points, thereby increasing the risk of errors and potential regulatory breaches. Another incorrect approach might involve adopting new technologies without adequate due diligence on their security features or compliance with data privacy regulations, exposing the firm to significant legal and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach could be the elimination of established control procedures under the guise of efficiency, without a proper risk assessment to confirm that these controls are not essential for regulatory compliance or risk mitigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the strategic objectives, e.g., cost reduction, and then systematically evaluates potential solutions against operational capabilities, risk appetite, and regulatory obligations. This involves engaging relevant stakeholders, conducting impact assessments, and seeking expert advice where necessary. The process should be iterative, with continuous monitoring and review to ensure that optimization efforts remain aligned with both business goals and compliance requirements. Question 8. Process analysis reveals that a long-standing client, known for their conservative investment profile, is now requesting to invest a significant portion of their portfolio into a highly speculative new product that has recently become available. The client explicitly states they have researched the product and are confident in its potential returns, instructing the firm to execute the trade immediately. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm's operations team? Option A. Execute the trade immediately as per the client's explicit instruction, as the client has indicated they have conducted their own research. Option B. Document the client's instruction and proceed with the trade, assuming the client has accepted all associated risks due to their stated research. Option C. Defer the suitability assessment to a later date, after the initial transaction has been processed, to avoid delaying the client's request. Option D. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment to determine if the new product aligns with the client's overall investment objectives, risk tolerance, financial situation, and knowledge and experience, and only proceed if deemed suitable. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment to determine if the new product aligns with the client's overall investment objectives, risk tolerance, financial situation, and knowledge and experience, and only proceed if deemed suitable. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a specific investment product and the firm's regulatory obligation to ensure suitability. The firm must balance client relationship management with its fiduciary duty and compliance requirements. The pressure to retain business can create an incentive to overlook potential suitability issues, making objective assessment critical. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough suitability assessment before proceeding with the transaction. This aligns with the principles of client protection and regulatory compliance mandated by the ACI Operations Certificate Framework. Specifically, it upholds the duty to act in the client's best interests, ensuring that any recommended or executed transaction is appropriate given the client's investment objectives, risk tolerance, financial situation, and knowledge and experience. This proactive approach mitigates the risk of mis-selling and potential regulatory breaches. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the transaction immediately based on the client's explicit instruction without conducting a suitability assessment. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement to ensure suitability and could lead to a transaction that is not in the client's best interests, potentially resulting in financial harm to the client and regulatory sanctions for the firm. It demonstrates a disregard for the firm's duty of care. Another incorrect approach is to defer the suitability assessment to a later date or to a different department without any interim checks. This creates a significant gap in the compliance process. The firm remains responsible for ensuring suitability at the point of transaction execution. Delaying this critical step increases the likelihood of an unsuitable transaction occurring and being difficult to rectify, exposing the firm to regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach is to simply document the client's instruction and proceed, assuming the client is fully informed and has accepted all risks. While client instructions are important, they do not absolve the firm of its responsibility to assess suitability. This approach overlooks the firm's proactive role in safeguarding clients, particularly those who may not fully understand the implications of their investment choices. It prioritizes transactional efficiency over client protection and regulatory adherence. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core conflict between client demand and regulatory obligation. Second, consult the relevant regulatory guidelines and internal policies regarding client suitability and order execution. Third, prioritize the client's best interests and regulatory compliance over immediate transactional gains. Fourth, engage in open communication with the client to explain the necessity of the suitability assessment and its benefits. If the client remains insistent on an unsuitable transaction, the professional must be prepared to decline the order, documenting the reasons clearly and offering alternative, suitable solutions. This systematic approach ensures ethical conduct and regulatory adherence. Question 9. Regulatory review indicates that a client, who is a significant shareholder in a publicly listed company, has contacted your firm requesting an immediate sale of a substantial block of shares. The client states they have urgent personal reasons for the sale and implies they have recent, significant, and potentially market-moving information about the company that they are not at liberty to disclose. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm to take? Option A. Immediately execute the trade as instructed by the client, as the client is responsible for their own trading decisions. Option B. Politely decline the trade and suggest the client seek advice from another broker. Option C. Refuse to execute the trade and inform the client that the firm cannot facilitate transactions based on potentially non-public information. Option D. Pause the execution of the trade, seek clarification from the client regarding the nature of the information they possess, and assess its materiality and non-public status before proceeding. The correct answer is A. Immediately execute the trade as instructed by the client, as the client is responsible for their own trading decisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between client instructions and regulatory obligations. The firm's compliance department must navigate the potential for market abuse while adhering to the client's desire for swift execution. The difficulty lies in balancing the client's commercial interests with the firm's duty to maintain market integrity and prevent insider dealing, which carries significant legal and reputational risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the nature of the information the client possesses. This aligns with the firm's regulatory obligation under the UK's Market Abuse Regulation, MAR, to take all reasonable steps to prevent insider dealing. By seeking clarification and assessing the materiality and non-public nature of the information, the firm is fulfilling its duty to identify potential insider information before executing trades. This proactive stance is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and compliance with MAR. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the trade immediately without further inquiry. This directly contravenes the firm's obligation under MAR to prevent insider dealing. Executing trades based on potentially inside information, even if instructed by the client, exposes the firm and its employees to severe penalties, including fines and reputational damage. It demonstrates a failure to exercise professional judgment and a disregard for regulatory requirements. Another incorrect approach is to refuse the trade outright, without understanding the client's information. While cautious, this might not be the most professionally adept response. It could alienate the client and potentially lead them to seek execution elsewhere, where regulatory oversight might be less stringent. The firm has a responsibility to serve its clients, but this must be balanced with regulatory compliance. A more constructive approach would be to investigate first. A third incorrect approach is to execute the trade but flag it for post-trade review. This is insufficient as it does not prevent potential market abuse from occurring in the first place. MAR requires preventative measures, not just retrospective checks. Relying solely on post-trade surveillance for potentially material non-public information is a reactive measure that fails to meet the proactive requirements of insider dealing regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a risk-based approach. The primary consideration is regulatory compliance, specifically the prevention of market abuse. This involves a systematic process of information gathering, risk assessment, and decision-making. When faced with client instructions that could potentially involve market abuse, the professional's duty is to pause, investigate, and seek clarification. If the information is confirmed as inside information, the firm must refuse to execute the trade and report the situation as required by regulation. This structured decision-making process ensures that client interests are considered within the framework of legal and ethical obligations. Question 10. System analysis indicates a critical trading system has experienced a significant outage during a period of high market volatility. Initial diagnostics suggest a data corruption issue, but the exact extent is unclear. The firm faces immense pressure to resume trading operations swiftly to minimize client losses and market impact. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action from an operational and regulatory perspective? Option A. Focus solely on restoring system functionality to its pre-outage state, assuming data integrity will be implicitly restored with the system, and defer regulatory notification until after normal operations resume. Option B. Immediately notify relevant regulatory authorities of the significant operational incident and initiate a phased system restoration plan that includes concurrent data integrity checks and client communication. Option C. Prioritize a comprehensive data integrity validation and reconciliation process, followed by a root cause analysis, before attempting any system restoration or notifying regulators. Option D. Immediately initiate system restoration procedures, focusing on getting the trading platform back online as quickly as possible, and then investigate data integrity and notify regulators. The correct answer is D. Immediately initiate system restoration procedures, focusing on getting the trading platform back online as quickly as possible, and then investigate data integrity and notify regulators. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in managing operational risk related to a critical system failure during a period of high market volatility. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need to restore functionality with the regulatory imperative to ensure data integrity and prevent market disruption. The firm's reputation and client trust are at stake, requiring a swift yet compliant response. The pressure to resume trading quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise regulatory adherence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes immediate communication with relevant regulatory bodies and internal stakeholders, followed by a structured incident response plan that includes data integrity checks and a root cause analysis. This aligns with the principles of operational resilience and market integrity mandated by financial regulations. Prompt notification demonstrates transparency and allows regulators to assess potential market impact, fulfilling obligations under frameworks that emphasize proactive risk management and reporting of significant operational incidents. The emphasis on data integrity ensures that any resumed trading is based on accurate information, preventing further market distortion or client harm. Incorrect approaches analysis. Resuming trading immediately without thorough data validation and regulatory notification is a significant regulatory failure. It breaches principles of market integrity and could lead to the execution of trades based on erroneous data, causing financial losses and market instability. This bypasses the requirement for firms to maintain robust systems and controls and to report significant operational disruptions, focusing solely on system restoration without assessing data integrity risks further exacerbates the problem. While system functionality is crucial, if the underlying data is compromised, resuming operations could perpetuate or amplify errors, leading to regulatory breaches related to accurate record-keeping and fair market conduct. Delaying communication with regulators until after the system is fully restored, even if data integrity is addressed, can be problematic. Regulations often require timely notification of significant operational incidents to allow for supervisory oversight and to mitigate systemic risk. A delayed notification can be interpreted as a lack of transparency and a failure to adhere to reporting obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a scenario should adopt a structured incident management framework. This involves 1. Immediate assessment of the incident's impact and scope. 2. Activation of the firm's business continuity and disaster recovery plans. 3. Prioritizing communication, first to internal risk and compliance teams, then to relevant regulatory bodies, and finally to affected clients. 4. Ensuring data integrity is paramount before any system restoration that impacts trading. 5. Conducting a thorough root cause analysis to prevent recurrence. 6. Documenting all actions taken and decisions made for regulatory review. This systematic approach ensures compliance, protects market integrity, and upholds client trust. Question 11. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a client who has been with the firm for several years and typically conducts low-value domestic transactions has requested an immediate transfer of a substantial sum to an offshore account in a jurisdiction known for its lax financial regulations. The stated purpose for the transfer is business investment opportunities, with no further details provided. The client is insistent on the speed of the transfer. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the operations professional? Option A. Escalate the transaction to the firm's compliance department for review and guidance, citing the unusual nature of the request, the destination jurisdiction, and the vague purpose. Option B. Contact the client directly to request a detailed breakdown of the business investment opportunities and the source of the funds. Option C. Proceed with the transfer as requested, given the client's long-standing relationship with the firm and their insistence on speed. Option D. Immediately refuse the transaction and inform the client that the firm cannot facilitate such a transfer. Correct answer is A. Escalate the transaction to the firm's compliance department for review and guidance, citing the unusual nature of the request, the destination jurisdiction, and the vague purpose. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial operations where a client's instructions, while seemingly straightforward, could lead to a breach of regulatory requirements if executed without proper due diligence. The challenge lies in balancing client service with the paramount duty to adhere to anti-money laundering (AML) regulations. The operations professional must identify the potential red flags within the client's request and understand the implications of proceeding without further investigation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves recognizing the unusual nature of the transaction and the client's stated purpose. Best professional practice dictates that any transaction that appears unusual or potentially suspicious, especially one involving significant cross-border movement of funds with a vague explanation, should be escalated for further review. This aligns with the principles of Know Your Customer (KIC) and AML regulations, which require financial institutions to understand their customers and the nature of their transactions to prevent financial crime. Specifically, the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, POCA, and the Money Laundering Regulations 2017, MLR 2017, in the UK impose obligations on firms to report suspicious activity. By escalating, the professional is fulfilling their regulatory duty to report potential money laundering or terrorist financing. Incorrect approach is analysis. Proceeding with the transaction without further inquiry is a direct failure to comply with AML obligations. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential for the funds to be involved in illicit activities, which is a breach of POCA and MLR's 2017. This approach prioritizes client instruction over regulatory compliance. Contacting the client for a more detailed explanation of the fund's origin and intended use without first considering escalation could be problematic. While gathering information is important, if the initial request already raises red flags, bypassing the internal suspicious activity reporting (SAR) process and directly engaging the client could tip off the client if they are involved in illicit activity, hindering a potential investigation by the National Crime Agency (NCA). This could be seen as a failure to follow established internal AML procedures. Immediately refusing the transaction without any attempt to understand the situation or escalate it could be seen as poor client service and potentially discriminatory if not based on objective regulatory concerns. While caution is necessary, a complete refusal without due process might not be the most appropriate first step if there's a possibility of a legitimate, albeit unusual, transaction that can be clarified through proper channels. However, in this specific scenario, the red flags are strong enough that escalation is the primary and immediate requirement. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach. When faced with a client instruction that deviates from normal patterns or lacks clear justification, the immediate professional response should be to assess the potential regulatory and reputational risks. This involves understanding the firm's internal AML policies and procedures, which typically include thresholds for escalation. The decision-making process should prioritize regulatory compliance and the prevention of financial crime. If a transaction appears suspicious, the default action should be to pause and escalate, rather than to proceed or to engage in direct client questioning that could compromise an investigation. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a phishing attack leading to unauthorized access to client data, and the potential impact is assessed as high. Following a report from a junior operations staff member about suspicious email activity and a potential login attempt from an unknown IP address on a client account, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the operations team lead? Option A. Temporarily suspend all client account access until the IT department can confirm the security of the system. Option B. Immediately inform all clients about the potential for a data breach to ensure transparency and allow them to take protective measures. Option C. Advise the junior staff member to delete the suspicious emails and monitor the client account for any further unusual activity, resolving it internally. Option D. Initiate the firm's formal incident response plan, escalating the suspected breach to the cybersecurity and compliance departments for immediate investigation and assessment. The correct answer is D. Initiate the firm's formal incident response plan, escalating the suspected breach to the cybersecurity and compliance departments for immediate investigation and assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between operational efficiency and regulatory compliance when dealing with a potential data breach. The firm's obligation to protect client data is paramount, and any suspected compromise requires immediate and thorough investigation. The challenge lies in balancing the need for swift action to mitigate damage with the requirement to follow established protocols and regulatory mandates for reporting and remediation. The correct approach, which involves immediately escalating the suspected data breach to the relevant internal compliance and security teams and initiating the firm's incident response plan, represents best professional practice. This aligns with regulatory frameworks such as those governing data protection and financial services operations, which mandate prompt reporting and containment of security incidents. Specifically, regulations would require the firm to have robust procedures in place to identify, assess, and respond to such events, ensuring client confidentiality and data integrity are maintained. This proactive and protocol-driven response minimizes potential harm to clients and the firm, and demonstrates adherence to supervisory expectations. An incorrect approach of attempting to resolve the issue internally without proper escalation or documentation would fail to meet regulatory obligations. This could lead to a delayed or inadequate response, increasing the risk of further data compromise and potential reputational damage. Such an approach would violate principles of due diligence and the duty to protect client information, potentially contravening specific data protection laws and financial conduct rules that require timely notification and remediation. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately notifying all clients without a confirmed breach or a clear understanding of the scope, could cause undue alarm and erode client trust. While transparency is important, premature or unsubstantiated communication can be detrimental. This might also violate internal communication policies and could be seen as a failure to conduct a proper risk assessment before disseminating sensitive information. A further incorrect approach, such as delaying the internal investigation to avoid potential regulatory scrutiny, is ethically unsound and legally perilous. This constitutes a willful disregard for compliance obligations and could result in severe penalties, including fines and sanctions, for failing to report or address a material risk event in a timely manner. It undermines the integrity of the firm's operations and its commitment to regulatory adherence. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the firm's incident response plan, a commitment to adhering to regulatory requirements, and a focus on protecting client interests. When faced with a suspected breach, the immediate steps should be to gather initial information, assess the potential severity, and trigger the established incident response framework, which typically involves notifying designated internal teams responsible for investigation, containment, and regulatory reporting. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates that a proposed system upgrade aims to significantly reduce processing times for trade settlements. While the project team highlights the potential for substantial cost savings and improved efficiency, concerns have been raised internally regarding the potential impact on data reconciliation and the integrity of audit trails. What is the most appropriate approach to manage the risks associated with this system upgrade? Option A. Delegate the responsibility for assessing the risks to the IT department, assuming they have the expertise to manage all operational risks associated with the upgrade. Option B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify potential impacts on data integrity, audit trails, and regulatory compliance, and develop mitigation strategies before proceeding with the upgrade. Option C. Implement the upgrade with minimal testing, focusing primarily on the speed improvements, and rely on manual checks to compensate for any potential data integrity issues. Option D. Proceed with the system upgrade immediately to realize the cost savings and address any data reconciliation or audit trail issues that may arise after implementation. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify potential impacts on data integrity, audit trails, and regulatory compliance, and develop mitigation strategies before proceeding with the upgrade. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the operational team to balance the immediate need for efficiency with the long-term imperative of robust risk management. The pressure to reduce costs and streamline processes can lead to overlooking critical control points. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks that might not be immediately apparent but could have significant consequences if left unaddressed. This requires a proactive and analytical mindset, moving beyond simply executing tasks to understanding the underlying risks associated with those tasks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the potential impact of the proposed changes on various operational areas, including data integrity, system security, regulatory compliance, and client service. This assessment should identify specific risks, evaluate their likelihood and impact, and then develop appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with the principles of sound operational risk management, which mandates a systematic process for identifying, assessing, and controlling risks. By proactively identifying potential issues and implementing controls, the firm upholds its duty to maintain operational resilience and protect its clients and its reputation, adhering to the spirit and letter of regulatory expectations for robust internal controls and risk management frameworks. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing changes solely based on perceived efficiency gains without a thorough risk assessment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the fundamental principle of operational risk management, which requires a structured evaluation of potential adverse events. It can lead to breaches of regulatory requirements related to data protection, system integrity, and business continuity. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential harm to clients and the firm's stakeholders. Focusing only on the cost-saving aspect of the changes, without considering the operational implications, is another failure. This narrow focus can lead to the implementation of solutions that, while cheaper, introduce new or exacerbate existing risks. Regulators expect firms to manage their operations holistically, not in silos driven by cost reduction targets alone. This approach can result in increased operational errors, system failures, or compliance breaches, all of which carry regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Adopting a wait-and-see approach, where risks are only addressed if they materialize, is a reactive and unacceptable strategy. This fundamentally undermines the proactive nature of risk management. Regulatory frameworks emphasize the importance of preventative measures and robust control environments. A wait-and-see attitude can lead to significant operational disruptions, financial losses, and regulatory sanctions when risks inevitably manifest. It demonstrates a failure to establish and maintain adequate systems and controls, a core regulatory obligation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the proposed operational changes and their intended benefits. Subsequently, they must initiate a formal risk assessment process. This involves identifying all potential risks associated with the changes, assessing their severity, likelihood, and impact, and then developing a plan to mitigate or accept these risks. This plan should be documented and communicated to relevant stakeholders. The decision-making process should be guided by the firm's risk appetite framework and regulatory obligations, ensuring that any implemented changes do not compromise the firm's operational integrity or compliance posture. A continuous monitoring and review process should be in place to adapt to evolving risks. Question 14. The risk matrix shows that a particular operational process has been rated as medium risk. However, new regulatory guidance has been issued that specifically addresses this type of process, suggesting a potentially higher inherent risk and a lower tolerance for operational errors than previously understood. Which of the following represents the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Continue with the existing controls as the process has historically operated without significant issues, assuming the new guidance is advisory rather than mandatory. Option B. Conduct a detailed review of the new regulatory guidance to understand its implications for the risk assessment of the operational process, reevaluate the risk matrix accordingly, and propose control enhancements if the updated assessment indicates a higher risk level. Option C. Update the risk matrix to reflect a high risk rating solely based on the issuance of new guidance, without a detailed analysis of its specific impact on the process. Option D. Immediately implement a comprehensive suite of new, stringent controls for the operational process to ensure full compliance with the spirit of the new guidance, irrespective of the current risk rating. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed review of the new regulatory guidance to understand its implications for the risk assessment of the operational process, reevaluate the risk matrix accordingly, and propose control enhancements if the updated assessment indicates a higher risk level. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in risk assessment by requiring the operational team to interpret a risk matrix that has been updated with new regulatory guidance. The difficulty lies in understanding how the updated guidance impacts the existing risk ratings and whether a proactive adjustment to controls is warranted, even if no immediate incident has occurred. The team must balance the need for compliance with the practicalities of resource allocation and the potential for over-engineering controls. The challenge is to move beyond a static view of risk to a dynamic one that incorporates evolving regulatory expectations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the updated regulatory guidance and its implications for the existing risk assessment. This means understanding how the new guidance might elevate the inherent risk of certain activities or introduce new risk factors not previously considered. It necessitates a reevaluation of the likelihood and impact of identified risks in light of this new information. If the updated guidance suggests a higher inherent risk or a lower tolerance for certain impacts, then the risk rating should be adjusted upwards, triggering a review of existing controls to ensure they remain adequate or require enhancement. This aligns with the principle of proactive risk management and adherence to regulatory expectations, ensuring the firm operates within the spirit and letter of the law. It demonstrates a commitment to maintaining an effective risk management framework that is responsive to the regulatory environment. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to dismiss the updated guidance as purely theoretical or not immediately applicable because no actual incidents have occurred. This fails to acknowledge the forward-looking nature of regulation, which often aims to prevent future issues. Ethically, it represents a passive approach to compliance and a disregard for the regulator's intent to strengthen oversight. This could lead to a breach of regulatory requirements if the guidance is interpreted as mandatory. Another incorrect approach is to immediately implement significant, costly control enhancements without a proper reassessment of the risk matrix. This can lead to inefficient use of resources and may not address the most critical risks identified by the updated guidance. It demonstrates a lack of analytical rigor and a reactive rather than a considered, risk-based response. This could also be seen as a failure to manage operational costs effectively, which is an implicit regulatory expectation. A third incorrect approach is to assume the existing controls are sufficient simply because they have historically been effective. This ignores the possibility that the regulatory landscape has shifted, making previously acceptable levels of risk now unacceptable. It is a failure to adapt to changing standards and could result in a firm being out of compliance with current expectations, even if past performance was satisfactory. This is a failure to maintain an up-to-date risk management framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first understanding the specific changes introduced by the updated regulatory guidance. This involves dissecting the guidance to identify any new risk factors, altered impact assessments, or revised likelihood considerations. Following this, they should systematically reevaluate the relevant entries on the risk matrix, considering how the new guidance affects the inherent risk profile. If the reevaluation indicates an increased risk rating, the next step is to determine if existing controls are sufficient to mitigate this elevated risk to an acceptable level. If not, a plan for control enhancement or implementation should be developed, prioritizing actions based on the magnitude of the risk increase and the potential impact. This structured, analytical process ensures that decisions are evidence-based, compliant, and aligned with the firm's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. Question 15. Investigation of a client's trading patterns reveals a series of unusually timed and sized trades in a specific security, immediately preceding a significant public announcement by the company. While the client has not explicitly disclosed any non-public information, the timing and nature of these trades raise concerns about potential insider dealing or market manipulation. The operations professional responsible for monitoring these activities is aware of the client's close relationship with an executive at the company. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Escalate the matter internally to the compliance department for further investigation and guidance. Option B. Ignore the trading patterns as they do not constitute definitive proof of wrongdoing. Option C. Directly confront the client about their trading activity and the potential implications. Option D. Immediately report the trading activity to the relevant regulatory authority without internal consultation. The correct answer is A. Escalate the matter internally to the compliance department for further investigation and guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the potential conflict between client confidentiality and the obligation to report suspicious activity, a core tenet of financial crime prevention. The operations professional is privy to information that, while not definitively illegal, raises significant red flags regarding potential market manipulation. Navigating this requires a delicate balance, ensuring client trust is maintained while adhering to regulatory mandates designed to protect market integrity. The challenge lies in discerning when suspicion crosses the threshold into a reportable event without prematurely or incorrectly implicating a client. The correct approach, which involves discreetly escalating the matter internally to the compliance department for further investigation, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of the ACI Operations Certificate, which emphasizes adherence to regulatory frameworks and ethical conduct. Specifically, it upholds the spirit of regulations such as those governing market abuse and insider dealing, by ensuring that potential breaches are investigated by those with the expertise and authority to do so. This internal escalation process allows for a thorough, objective review of the situation, respecting client confidentiality until concrete evidence warrants external reporting. It also ensures that the firm meets its regulatory obligations to monitor and report suspicious transactions. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the suspicious activity. This failure directly contravenes regulatory requirements to identify and report suspicious transactions, potentially exposing the firm to significant penalties and reputational damage. It also demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and ethical responsibility. Another incorrect approach would be to directly confront the client without consulting compliance. This could breach client confidentiality, alert the potential wrongdoer, and compromise any subsequent investigation, thereby undermining regulatory efforts to combat market abuse. Furthermore, it bypasses the established internal control mechanisms designed to handle such sensitive situations appropriately. A third incorrect approach would be to report the activity externally without sufficient internal investigation or consultation. This could lead to unfounded accusations, damage client relationships, and create unnecessary regulatory scrutiny for the firm, demonstrating a failure to exercise sound professional judgment and follow established procedures. Professionals should approach such situations by first recognizing the potential implications of the observed activity. The next step is to consult internal policies and procedures regarding suspicious activity reporting. If the situation warrants, discreetly escalate the matter to the appropriate internal department, such as compliance or legal, providing all relevant details. This allows for a structured and compliant investigation, ensuring that client confidentiality is respected while regulatory obligations are met. Question 16. What factors determine the appropriate level of due diligence required before executing a large, time-sensitive trade for a client, particularly when the client's urgency might suggest potential market sensitivity? Option A. The speed at which the trade can be executed and the firm's existing liquidity position. Option B. The potential profit margin on the trade and the client's historical trading volume with the firm. Option C. The client's direct instruction to proceed without delay and the absence of any explicit regulatory prohibition. Option D. The client's stated reason for urgency, the nature of the security, and the potential market impact of the trade, coupled with consultation with the firm's compliance department. The correct answer is D. The client's stated reason for urgency, the nature of the security, and the potential market impact of the trade, coupled with consultation with the firm's compliance department. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an operations professional to balance the immediate need for market liquidity with the potential for market abuse. The firm's reputation, regulatory standing, and the integrity of the market are all at stake. The decision-maker must exercise sound judgment, considering not only the firm's internal policies, but also the broader regulatory expectations concerning market conduct. The pressure to execute a large trade quickly can lead to overlooking crucial compliance checks, making a robust decision-making process essential. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance and market integrity. This includes thoroughly understanding the nature of the security, the client's intent and potential impact on the market, and consulting with the firm's compliance department. This aligns with the principles of market abuse prevention, which are central to regulatory frameworks like those governing ACI operations certificate holders. Specifically, it addresses the need to identify and prevent insider dealing, market manipulation, and the improper disclosure of inside information. By engaging compliance, the firm ensures adherence to relevant regulations and internal policies designed to safeguard against such activities. This proactive and informed approach demonstrates best professional practice by embedding compliance into the operational workflow. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the trade solely based on the client's urgency and the potential for profit represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach ignores the fundamental responsibility to prevent market abuse. It prioritizes commercial gain over compliance, which is a direct contravention of regulatory expectations. Such an action could lead to accusations of facilitating insider dealing or market manipulation, resulting in severe penalties for both the individual and the firm. Another incorrect approach is to execute the trade without any further due diligence, assuming the client is acting legitimately. This demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a failure to uphold the duty of care expected of operations professionals. It overlooks the possibility that the client's urgency might stem from having access to price-sensitive information not yet in the public domain. This passive approach can inadvertently make the firm complicit in market abuse. Finally, delaying the trade indefinitely without clear communication or a defined process for assessment is also an incorrect approach. While caution is necessary, an indefinite delay without a structured review process can damage client relationships and potentially lead to missed legitimate opportunities. However, the primary failure here is not in the delay itself, but in the lack of a systematic, compliance-driven process to resolve the situation, which still falls short of best practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals in operations must adopt a risk-based approach that integrates compliance at every stage. When faced with unusual or potentially sensitive transactions, the decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the client and the transaction's context. 2. Identifying potential regulatory red flags, e.g., unusual timing, size, or client behavior. 3. Consulting with internal compliance and legal teams for guidance. 4. Documenting all assessments and decisions thoroughly. 5. Escalating concerns to appropriate senior management or compliance officers. This structured approach ensures that commercial objectives are pursued within the bounds of regulatory requirements and ethical standards, thereby protecting the firm and the integrity of the financial markets. Question 17. When evaluating an instruction from a senior trader to execute a large, unusual trade in a thinly traded security shortly before a significant corporate announcement, what is the most appropriate professional response to ensure compliance with market abuse regulations? Option A. Refuse to execute the trade outright, citing general concerns about market integrity without seeking further information. Option B. Execute the trade immediately as instructed, assuming the senior trader is acting in the firm's best interest and is aware of all regulatory implications. Option C. Seek immediate clarification from the senior trader regarding the rationale for the trade and any potential conflicts with regulatory guidelines, and if concerns persist, escalate to the compliance department. Option D. Proceed with the trade, but document the instruction and execution without further investigation, assuming the responsibility lies with the instructing party. The correct answer is C. Seek immediate clarification from the senior trader regarding the rationale for the trade and any potential conflicts with regulatory guidelines, and if concerns persist, escalate to the compliance department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an operations professional to balance the immediate need for trade execution with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and internal policies designed to prevent market abuse and ensure fair dealing. The challenge lies in discerning when a seemingly routine instruction might carry a higher risk of regulatory scrutiny or even constitute a breach of conduct. Careful judgment is required to identify potential red flags without unduly hindering legitimate market activity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to regulatory frameworks and internal controls. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of market integrity and the prevention of insider dealing or market manipulation, which are core tenets of financial regulation. By seeking clarification and escalating the matter when uncertainty exists, the professional demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to upholding regulatory standards, thereby protecting both the firm and the integrity of the market. This proactive stance is crucial in a regulated environment. An incorrect approach that involves executing the trade immediately without further inquiry fails to uphold the duty of care and the obligation to comply with regulations. This could lead to a breach of rules concerning market abuse, such as insider dealing or manipulation, if the instruction was indeed based on non-public information or intended to distort the market. Another incorrect approach, which is to refuse to execute the trade outright without understanding the context, might be overly cautious and could impede legitimate business operations. However, the most significant regulatory and ethical failure lies in proceeding without due diligence when there is a reasonable suspicion of impropriety. This demonstrates a disregard for regulatory obligations and a failure to act with integrity. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment. First, the professional must understand the instruction in its full context. Second, they should assess the instruction against known regulatory requirements and internal policies, looking for any potential conflicts or red flags. Third, if any doubt or suspicion arises, the professional should seek clarification from the originator of the instruction or their supervisor. If clarification does not resolve the concern, escalation to the compliance department is the appropriate next step. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, prioritizing market integrity and regulatory adherence. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a long-standing client, whose business involves international trade, has recently begun depositing unusually large amounts of cash into their account on a weekly basis, with no clear explanation for the change in transaction patterns. The firm's current customer due diligence measures have not flagged this as an immediate issue, but the volume and frequency of cash deposits are a deviation from historical activity. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firm to take in response to this situation, adhering strictly to UK regulatory requirements and FCA guidance? Option A. Immediately freeze the client's account and terminate the business relationship due to the suspicious nature of the cash deposits. Option B. Increase the frequency of internal transaction monitoring alerts for this client without further investigation or escalation. Option C. Escalate the matter to the firm's Money Laundering Reporting Officer, MLRO, for further investigation and consider conducting enhanced due diligence on the client to understand the source of funds and the nature of their transactions. Option D. Continue processing the cash deposits as usual, as the client has a history with the firm and no explicit breach of policy has occurred. The correct answer is C. Escalate the matter to the firm's Money Laundering Reporting Officer, MLRO, for further investigation and consider conducting enhanced due diligence on the client to understand the source of funds and the nature of their transactions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial operations, balancing the need for efficient transaction processing with the imperative of robust regulatory compliance. The firm has identified a potential gap in its anti-money laundering (AML) controls related to the handling of large cash deposits from a specific client. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of scrutiny and action without unduly disrupting legitimate business activities or unfairly penalizing the client, while strictly adhering to the UK's regulatory framework, including the Money Laundering Regulations 2017 and guidance from the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted response that prioritizes regulatory obligations and risk mitigation. This includes escalating the matter internally to the designated compliance officer, or MLRO, Money Laundering Reporting Officer, for expert assessment, conducting enhanced due diligence, ED, on the client to understand the source of funds and the nature of their transactions, and potentially filing a suspicious activity report, SAR, if the risk assessment warrants it. This approach aligns with the FCA's principles of treating customers fairly and acting with integrity, as well as the legal requirements under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 and the Money Laundering Regulations 2017. EDD is a cornerstone of AML compliance, allowing the firm to gather more information to assess and manage higher risks. Filing a SAR is a legal obligation when suspicion of money laundering or terrorist financing arises. Incorrect approach is analysis. Ignoring the red flags and continuing with standard procedures represents a direct failure to comply with the firm's AML obligations. This would breach the Money Laundering Regulations 2017, which mandate risk-based approaches and the implementation of appropriate controls. It also violates the FCA's principles for businesses, particularly Principle 3, Managing Systems and Controls, and Principle 5, Customers' Interests. Immediately ceasing all business with the client without proper investigation is an overreaction that could lead to reputational damage and potential claims from the client if their activities are legitimate. While risk mitigation is important, it must be proportionate and based on a thorough assessment, not immediate punitive action. This approach fails to follow the principle of proportionality and could be seen as unfair treatment of a customer. Simply increasing the frequency of internal reporting without taking concrete steps to investigate or escalate the matter externally if required, is insufficient. Internal reporting is a step, but it must lead to actionable intelligence and appropriate risk management decisions, including potential external reporting to the National Crime Agency, NCA, via a SAR. This approach demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and a failure to fulfill the firm's statutory duties. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation must adopt a systematic, risk-based approach. The first step is to recognize and document the potential red flags. This should be followed by an internal escalation to the compliance function, or MLRO, who are equipped to interpret regulatory requirements and assess the risk. The firm must then undertake enhanced due diligence to gather sufficient information to make an informed decision. This decision-making process should consider the client's profile, the nature of the transactions, the source of funds, and the overall risk appetite of the firm, always in alignment with the UK's AML and counter-terrorist financing legislation and FCA guidance. If suspicion remains after EDD, the legal obligation to report to the NCA must be considered. Question 19. The monitoring system demonstrates a series of trades executed by a particular client that, while not overtly illegal, exhibit an unusual pattern of increasing volume and price manipulation in a thinly traded security over a short period, raising concerns about potential market abuse. Option A. Initiate a formal investigation by gathering all available trading data, communication records, and market context related to the client's trades before consulting with compliance. Option B. Discuss the trading pattern with other traders in the department to gauge their opinion on whether it constitutes market abuse before taking any action. Option C. Immediately escalate the findings to the compliance department with a detailed report outlining the observed trading pattern and the potential regulatory concerns, recommending further investigation. Option D. Dismiss the alert as an anomaly, given that the client has no prior history of suspicious trading and the observed pattern is infrequent. The correct answer is C. Immediately escalate the findings to the compliance department with a detailed report outlining the observed trading pattern and the potential regulatory concerns, recommending further investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance operational efficiency with ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The core dilemma lies in identifying and acting upon potential market abuse without causing undue disruption or making unsubstantiated accusations. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between unusual trading patterns and actual manipulative behavior, ensuring that actions taken are proportionate and justifiable. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based investigation before escalating concerns. This aligns with regulatory expectations that firms have robust systems and controls to detect and prevent market abuse, but also that investigations are conducted fairly and with due diligence. By gathering all relevant information and consulting with compliance, the individual ensures that any subsequent action is informed, defensible, and adheres to the principles of market integrity and fair dealing, as mandated by relevant financial conduct regulations. An incorrect approach that involves immediate reporting without further investigation fails to meet the standard of due diligence. It risks raising false alarms, potentially damaging the reputation of innocent market participants, and consuming valuable compliance resources unnecessarily. This could be seen as a failure to implement effective controls, as it bypasses the necessary steps to verify suspicious activity. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring the alert due to its infrequency, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure, demonstrates a disregard for the firm's responsibility to monitor for market abuse, and could lead to the undetected perpetration of illegal activities. This inaction directly contravenes the obligation to maintain market integrity and could result in severe regulatory sanctions for both the individual and the firm. A further incorrect approach, such as discussing the alert with colleagues not involved in the investigation, breaches confidentiality and could be construed as insider dealing or tipping, depending on the information shared and the context. This undermines trust and the integrity of the investigation process, creating further ethical and regulatory risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, acknowledge and record the alert. Second, gather all available data related to the alert. Third, analyze the data to identify patterns and potential breaches of regulations. Fourth, Consult with relevant internal departments such as compliance or legal to interpret findings and determine the appropriate course of action. And finally, act decisively based on the verified evidence and expert advice, ensuring all actions are documented. Question 20. The efficiency study reveals a significant operational improvement opportunity through a new vendor's proposed solution. However, the senior manager overseeing the vendor selection process has a close personal friendship with the vendor's principal. The operations team is eager to implement the solution due to its clear benefits. What is the most appropriate course of action for the operations manager? Option A. Escalate the matter to the compliance department and senior management for an independent review and decision on the vendor selection. Option B. Reject the vendor immediately due to the personal relationship, regardless of the proposed solution's merits. Option C. Proceed with the vendor, assuming the personal relationship will not influence the decision and the efficiency gains are paramount. Option D. Approve the vendor directly, citing the efficiency study, and inform the senior manager to manage their personal relationship discreetly. The correct answer is A. Escalate the matter to the compliance department and senior management for an independent review and decision on the vendor selection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in potential conflicts of interest and the obligation to maintain market integrity. The operations team has identified a significant operational inefficiency that, if addressed, could lead to substantial cost savings. However, the proposed solution involves a third-party vendor with whom a senior manager has a personal relationship. This relationship, even if not explicitly disclosed or acted upon improperly, creates an appearance of impropriety and raises concerns about the fairness and objectivity of the procurement process. The challenge lies in balancing the company's financial interests with its ethical obligations to conduct business transparently and avoid even the perception of favoritism. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach is to escalate the matter to the compliance department and senior management for an independent review and decision. This upholds best professional practice by ensuring that any decision regarding the vendor is made through a transparent and impartial process, free from the influence of personal relationships. It aligns with regulatory expectations for robust internal controls and conflict of interest management. By involving compliance, the firm demonstrates its commitment to adhering to the principles of fair dealing, market integrity, and avoiding any actions that could compromise its reputation or regulatory standing. This approach prioritizes due diligence and objective evaluation over expediency or personal connections. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the vendor without further scrutiny, relying on the belief that the personal relationship will not influence the decision. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it ignores the potential for unconscious bias and the appearance of impropriety. It violates principles of fair competition and could be seen as a breach of fiduciary duty if the chosen vendor is not demonstrably the best option based on objective criteria. Another incorrect approach is to bypass the compliance department and directly approve the vendor based on the efficiency study's findings, assuming the personal relationship is irrelevant. This is a significant ethical lapse and a potential regulatory breach. It demonstrates a disregard for established internal procedures designed to mitigate risks associated with conflicts of interest and undermines the authority and role of the compliance function. A third incorrect approach is to reject the vendor solely based on the personal relationship, without a thorough, objective evaluation of their proposal against other potential solutions. While caution is warranted, an outright rejection without due diligence could lead to the company missing out on a genuinely beneficial operational improvement, potentially harming the company's financial performance. This approach fails to balance risk mitigation with the pursuit of operational efficiency and could be seen as an overly cautious or even discriminatory stance, rather than a principled one. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, identify the potential conflict of interest or ethical concern. Second, consult internal policies and procedures related to conflicts of interest, procurement, and vendor selection. Third, seek guidance from the compliance department or legal counsel. Fourth, ensure all decisions are documented and based on objective criteria, even when personal relationships are involved. Finally, prioritize transparency and fairness in all business dealings to maintain trust and uphold regulatory standards.